electric grid today by default.
This meeting is being recorded.
So there's an immediate environmental benefit, and then
I'm sorry, I forgot to start the recording. I'm sorry about that. I just started it, and I had a question. When you say use low carbon fuels 43%, what is a non-electric energy?
So things like green hydrogen or biogas. So you might have heard some information from the gas company where they're doing things like capturing the excess methane from either like sewage or dairy farms. So there's a need to capture those emissions we call fugitive emissions, because methane is obviously a very potent greenhouse gas. And so if we can capture that, repurpose it, there's an environmental benefit to that. To a degree, right? We don't want to go out of our way to create pollution just to capture the methane, right? We want to minimize it at the source, but for that methane that we can't eliminate, we want to capture it and we can repurpose it instead of using fossil methane from the ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but how is that calculated? Are you using the math where 1 molecule of methane not released is worth 20 molecules of CO2?
Are you talking in terms of GHG benefit or in terms of the energy?
Yeah, is that 43% using that calculus, or? No,
the 43% doesn't refer to the GHG reduction. We're looking at total economy-wide energy use in terms of like therms. So we're estimating that we'll need about 57% of economy-wide energy use to come from clean electric sources, and then 43% will come from other sources other than electricity. So green hydrogen, biogas, other low carbon fuels. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. If you've ever seen, there's a really good, I forget what the name of the part is, but they show like all the economy.
Can everyone, Trish, can you mute yourself?
Sorry. Yeah. So it's looking at all the energy that we use across the economy, both consumers, industry, government, everything. So, we can start doing this today, and we have to really start doing it today. When we think about all these things that need to happen, right? All these cars and heavy duty trucks that need to get replaced, all these appliances and millions of homes and millions of vehicles. When we put our project manager caps on, it's a lot of work. But fortunately, there's immediate environmental benefits. So there's, it's sort of what we call a, no regrets type of an option. When we convert, like say like a bus off of diesel and put it onto electric, that's a no regrets option. Any questions on this before I move on to the next slide? Yep. So building electrification is one of the main pillars that we're pushing to help the state achieve its environmental goals. Oh, and then I forgot real quick too, is there's a difference between GHG and air quality, right? So there's a lot of similarities, but there's some important differences. So one of the great benefits of when we convert all these cars, trucks, appliances, water heaters and whatnot, you also get local air quality benefits, right, at the ground level. So there's less smog. And a lot of these technologies are even better at fighting smog than they are at fighting GHG emissions. So there's a secondary benefit when we look at the local health impacts of being able to breathe cleaner air, whether indoor or outdoor. So last December, Edison filed a $677 million application with the Public Utilities Commission, basically asking for permission to offer programs and incentives for customers to retrofit their homes, to switch their water heaters and furnaces off of natural gas or other fossil fuel sources onto electric, because we do serve some rural communities that are either like on propane or even some still use cut wood. So converting them off of those fossil fuel sources onto electricity and being able to tap into an increasingly decarbonized electric grid. So we're we're hoping, or we're asking the Public Utilities Commission for a decision by the end of next year, so 2023, so that way we can go live in 2024. It would be a 4-year program, and there would be a couple different programs within our portfolio. So we, when we were looking at the, the gaps, there are 2 really big gaps that we saw. There are the knowledge gaps. Customers a lot of times don't even know what a heat pump is. They, what is that? Never heard of it. Depending on where you live, there's probably they're not even available if you go into like a Lowe's or a Home Depot. So there's an education component. And then there's also the financial barriers, right? Because a lot of times, if we're talking about retrofits, people don't have the electrical wiring to the area where the furnace or the water heater might be. A lot of times they might need to do an electrical panel upgrade. So there's some, financial hurdles that customers have to overcome once they achieve that awareness. And so our program is proposing to first help customers by doing what we're calling the BE Home Ready Home Assessment. So do an energy audit and help customers understand the financial implications. Like, here's what you're currently paying on electricity and on gas. After we do this, based on the appliances you've selected, this is what your electricity and gas bills will look like after. So that way customers can make an informed decision about participating. And then helping provide incentives, not just for the appliances, but also for those the electrical infrastructure upgrades. So running the wiring, doing the panel upgrades. And then if that triggers any utility level upgrades, having budget available for that as well too. So the goal is to make it affordable for customers, so they're not spending thousands of dollars on upgrading their neighborhood transformer or doing a panel upgrade. Again, please go on mute unless you have a question. So there's a question from Joan. Will there be an ability to convert gas appliances? Hey, Lauren, can you go? Oh, there you go. Perfect. Thank you. So Joan asked, will there be an ability to convert gas appliances such as dryers to electric? So that's a great question. We are only offering incentives for other appliances on Catalina because there's a unique situation on Catalina. Because it's an island and it's kind of hard to get stuff over to the island because you have to ship it. So we're not offering the incentives for these other appliances like dryers or stoves, but on the infrastructure upgrades, we are allowing that to future-proof the home, right? Because if we're gonna upgrade the panel, we don't wanna upgrade it just for the water heater and the furnace. We also wanna look at if they're gonna eventually go fully electric. Are they going to upgrade their stove, their dryer? Are they going to add solar? Are they going to add EV charging? So the incentives for the home infrastructure upgrades will be sized appropriately for all potential future energy use. And then similarly, we'll have a mirror program on the commercial side too. So about 88% of the budget will be focused on residential communities with a big emphasis on what we call ESJ, environmental and social justice. So there'll be a higher level of incentives for low-income customers that meet the criteria. We'll also have similar programs on the commercial side. So about 12% of the program budget will be targeted at what we call non-residential or commercial customers. So we'll be providing them technical assistance and then offering similar incentives to help them with the retrofits and offering rebates for the appliances as well too. We're also proposing to partner with local community-based organizations to assist with the outreach, particularly in those ESJ communities, the more vulnerable low-income communities. And the logic behind that is, we want, we're going to partner with these CBOs, one, to help with program attrition, so doing education, doing outreach, helping recruit customers to the program, helping explain, what is this? Why should I do this in my home? And walking them through that whole process, right? We want to partner with CBOs that have relationships, that have trust within those communities, and can act as a conduit between our implementers and the community. And we're hoping that that will help with program uptake. So in total, over the 4 years, with residential and commercial, we're looking at incentivizing a quarter million heat pumps and 65,000 electrical panel and circuit upgrades. So we'll make a pretty big dent. The cost per unit for this is obviously going to be really high because it's a pilot program, but we're hoping that this will kickstart the market in Southern California. And actually, the next slide. So, we're hoping this will kickstart the program. There's going to be some workforce development components. We'll be working with local installers to get them comfortable, get them trained on selling and installing this equipment. And we're hoping that this will have lasting impacts on the market for these clean electric appliances, even after the program's done. So, again, part of our driving force is, we looked at the, down the road and where the state's going, and we identified that there's a significant gap. Basically, if we add up all the market trends and the existing incentives that have been approved and see, okay, if all these play out, right, if all the estimates of, where this is going play out, how many heat pumps will we have in 2030 versus how many do we need? So you see this yellow line is the adoption curve that we need in order to stay on track with the state's GHG reduction goals. And then all these like green, blue, and red shapes are different factors, different either market trends or incentive programs, and what that will translate to in terms of the number of heat pumps installed. And so we look up all these different factors that are driving heat pump adoption currently. We're only about halfway where we need to be in 2030. So we see there's going to be a significant shortfall. And so that's one of the main motivating factors for us filing this application is we want to kickstart the market here locally before 2030. And hopefully we can shrink that gap, at least in Southern California. What does electric resistance mean? So Anne asked, what does electric resistance mean? So electric, there's basically two different ways to create heat using electricity. Electric resistance is literally just running electricity through a coil and using the natural resistance of that material to create heat. So normally this is a problem like in distribution lines. We don't like that resistance because that heat is wasted electricity, or line losses. You might have heard the term line losses, but sometimes in appliances, we do this on purpose. So like a toaster works this way. Most toasters are electric resistance. You run electric current through an electrical coil and it heats up the coil, turning that electricity into heat. It's a relatively inefficient process. Heat pumps, everybody has a heat pump right now. If you have a refrigerator, you have a heat pump. So a heat pump moves heat from one place to another. So using, Grace has her hand up. She might be able to explain this a little bit better.
Well, I just wanted to tell Anne and anyone who's listening about resistance heating. Every time you turn on an incandescent light bulb, you know how it gets really hot? An incandescent light bulb, you're putting the electricity through a wire and you're creating light with 70% of it and you're creating heat with 30% of it. So in a resistance heater, you want to reverse it. You want to create more heat and less light.
Yeah.
And then the heat pump, I'll let you explain a heat pump, but if there are any questions, I'm a physicist.
Exactly. It's like she knows all the technical terms and the formulas better than I do. So a heat pump doesn't create heat, it just moves it from one place to another, and it's incredibly efficient. So if you have a refrigerator, you have a heat pump. And basically, like Grace mentioned, there's losses, right? Resistance is only about 70% efficient. When we look at heat pumps, they're upwards of 200% efficient. Some of the higher Energy Star rated heat pumps get up to 400% efficient, because you're not creating heat, you're moving it from one place to another. And from a financial perspective, the beauty of a heat pump HVAC is that it's bidirectional. So you buy one appliance and it functions as both an air conditioner and as a space heater. So there's cost savings in addition to the efficiency. Grace, did you still have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that a heat pump is a lot like your refrigerator in that you have a compressor and you're compressing a fluid, and and then you're taking you're taking the heat out of the air outside and compressing it and putting it inside. But what you're also, it seems like, oh, if it's 0 degrees, if it's freezing outside, you think that, and you want your house to be 23 degrees Celsius, from 0 to 23. It sounds like that's a huge change, but that's why physicists work in Kelvin. So when it's freezing, it's 273% Kelvin. And when it's comfortable inside, it's 23 plus 73 is what, 296 Kelvin. So it's only a 10% difference in the internal heat of the molecule. So heat pump is just taking advantage of that. It's only a very small, we only have to heat the air a very, very small amount. And then in the summertime, I just install the heat pump. It works like an air conditioner, but a very efficient one.
Yeah, there's a reversing valve, so you just flip it the other direction. So in the summer it goes one way, and in the winter it goes the opposite way. So these are some of the different benefits of our application. So we're targeting low-income customers, making sure they get a carve-out, making sure that they're not left behind. Equity is a big concern around the clean energy transition, and making sure that more vulnerable customers don't get left behind because of the financial barriers. We're hoping to scale the market by providing a large amount of incentives for a long period of time. We want to send a clear signal to the market that this is the trend for the future. Hey, local installers, this is the way things are going, and hopefully more of them will get on board. And as they see sales picking up, it'll be monkey see, monkey do, right? There's pollution, ground level pollution benefits. So, kind of flying under the radar, a lot of people don't realize the amount of nitrous oxides and particulates that are generated through the combustion of natural gas in our homes, whether it's a water heater or a stove. By switching to electric, you don't have that on-site combustion, so you don't have that air pollution. And then ultimately, whatever pollution is indoors ultimately makes its way outdoors. So again, flying under the radar, something like 10 or 12% of the nitrous oxides in Southern California come from gas appliances. The bulk of it's obviously transportation, but gas appliances are in the double digits. Consumer savings. So, we're doing those home energy audits to make sure that all the customers that we target are seeing at least either a null change in their bill or a slight decrease in their bill. And that's electric and gas combined, right? Because obviously they're using more electricity, so their electric bill will go up, but ideally we want their natural gas bill to go down by a larger amount. So there's a net savings. But then also on the consumer level, there's a neat thing with economics that as we increase the amount of electricity that's consumed, it puts downward pressure on electricity rates. Building electrification technologies typically operate when there's already excess capacity on the grid. So we don't have to do massive upgrades to the grid. But these consumers are using more electricity during that low time. And so therefore, we're able to spread those fixed costs of the poles and wires over a larger number of electrons. And so over the life of this program, it will actually pay for itself in terms of downward rate pressure. Economic development, obviously, this is not something we can outsource, right? These are going to be retrofits and happening in a couple 100,000 homes across Southern California. So there'll be some economic stimulation. There'll be significant GHG reductions, and it'll have impacts on our local energy system. So because we are replacing existing appliances with newer Energy Star appliances, it'll actually lower the Edison system-wide peak by about 18 megawatts. So it's not a huge amount. Our maximum peak in the summer is like around like 25,000. So it's not a huge amount, but when you think about it, we're installing all these new appliances, creating demand for more electricity, and yet our peak demand is going to go down by a little bit. And then of course, that'll also translate into reduced throughput on the gas system, right? Because we're switching people from natural gas to electric. And so this is helpful when we think about retiring gas infrastructure like the Aliso Canyon facility, or I know up in Ventura, there's a compressor station that a lot of community members are trying to push back against. Kathy, you have your hand up? Oh, you're on mute, Kathy.
I do. So are you saying that this program that you're talking about is going to reduce the peak demand? Or are you saying that the overall general electrification of cars and buildings is going to decrease the demand? Are we going to have an increase? What I'm asking is, there going to be an increased demand on our grid infrastructure?
So for electrification more broadly, there will be an increase. Building electrification will result in a decrease, because think about most of our customers currently have air conditioners, and air conditioners are typically what drives the peak demand in the summer. And so if we're taking somebody's 15, 20, 25-year-old air conditioner and replacing it with a super efficient heat pump, that new heat pump is going to use a lot less energy. And so that's where the reduction is coming from on the building side. When we talk about electrification more broadly and we start looking at transportation, that's going to result in an increase. So when we look at everything combined, over the next 25 years, we're forecasting about a 60% increase in total electricity consumption, but only about a 40% increase in the peak. And that's because a lot of these electric technologies, whether it's heat pumps or electric vehicles, they are what we call grid interactive. So they do smart charging, right? They tend to avoid charging during the peak. They charge more on the off peak.
Thank you.
And then I see Lauren has put in a question. So heat pumps are not all created equal. Can you say something about considerations regarding the refrigerants used in heat pumps? CARB is concerned about mass deployment in untraceable ways of heat pumps that use high GHG refrigerants. We need more CO2 heat pumps. Can you jumpstart that market? So that is a concern. And that's why with building electrification, we can't say that an all-electric home produces zero emissions, because even though on the energy side, the emissions go to zero, we still have the refrigerants, right? And over the life of the device, some of those refrigerants will leak. There is a process, I forget, it might be CARB, I forget which agency, but one of the agencies at the state is looking at adopting regulations to require manufacturers to use lower and lower GHG, or refrigerants with lower GHG intensity over time. So in the long run, this is something that the state's looking at. Grace, I think you have something to add?
Yeah, there was a recent study that came out. They determined that methane leakage with homes that like cook and use natural gas, there's about a 5% methane leakage within the home. So electrification, we want to keep the units in good working condition so they don't leak refrigerants, but the status quo is also very leaky too.
Correct. Yeah, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right?
Oh, can I say one more thing? Can I see one more thing? Is that last August we installed a heat pump, and I've been watching our electric bills trying to figure it out. And so not only have we saved like $90 on our wintertime gas bill because we're not using gas to heat anymore, but our electric bill did go up, but not as much as, like, we were using our gas heaters so little, and then we were using space heaters in our bedrooms at night. And so our electricity bill was like 140. Our electricity bill went from 140 to like 190, and our gas bill went down $90. So we ended up using a little bit more electricity, but being much more comfortable because we're heating up our whole house now, not just the rooms that we're in. And we are enjoying cleaner air. So I'm a big heat pump proponent.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I upgraded mine a couple years ago too, similar story. Fantastic. And I want to be respectful of time to make sure we still get to Bob. So these are some of the details. And again, I'm happy to PDF this and send it over to Grace so she can share with everybody. So don't feel like you have to write all these numbers down, but these are a little bit more details on some of the programs that we're offering, the numbers for the incentives, the different target markets. Please feel free, let me know if you have any other questions about these specifics. But basically, we'll be offering a lot of money to help a lot of homes and businesses reduce their fossil fuel consumption. So this was our external engagement process. So we did do a lot of what we call pre-filing outreach. We met with a number of CBOs and other stakeholders. We met with local governments. We met with labor. We met with manufacturers. Met with the gas company. We created a minimum threshold for our what we call the equity floor, so the funding reserve for ESJ communities. We increased the size of the program. We were originally looking at something like 450, 500 million. A lot of the environmental justice groups we spoke to said, no, we want more. This is our timeline. So we submitted our application last December, and we're looking to reach out, mobilize some of our supporters this month to show support to the Public Utilities Commission. So with that, I'm happy to take any other questions that people might have about this application. Anne, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm wondering, I don't think it's your responsibility, but how would the state be able to recover money if all of us go to electric vehicles, or 75% of us go to electric vehicles? How are they going to recover money to maintain our roads? That seems to me to be a really important question in our society.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer. It's not something that we've done any type of analysis or recommendations on. Fortunately, at least for the time being, we're not in any sort of sore shape, but you're absolutely right. It is a policy question that we'll need to discuss as EVs become higher. So the state did increase the registration fees on EVs, but it's not enough, right? It's not enough to cover the costs for road maintenance.
And even with gas taxes, general funds pay for more than, for the vast majority of road maintenance is not paid with gasoline tax, because the gasoline tax has stayed the same for over a decade. It's not even, cars get such a huge subsidy.
It looks like Joan has a question about ductless systems, mini splits. Yes, they are a good alternative, and we do include that as part of our package. Ductless is actually really great, especially for coastal communities that probably don't have the vents that have already been built in a lot of the more inland communities. They're super efficient, and they can actually be a lot cheaper than going back in and installing all that duct work in the home. And they come in heat, and they're typically heat pumps as well too, so they're super efficient. They heat and they cool. And I think they're a great technology. Perfect. So I will, are there any other questions before I hand it off to Bob? Right. So I will just conclude and say, I hope that you guys enjoyed what we have to say. I hope that you support this application. We are reaching out to our supporters and asking them to, consider providing a letter of support to the Public Utilities Commission in support of this application. If that's something that this group would be interested in, please let Grace know, and she can follow up with me, and I'm happy to give you all the information on how to go about doing that.
Okay, and you said ESJ. You said ESJ communities. So are those the top 25% most burdened communities on the Cal EnviroScreen tool?
So we did look at that. That was part of the feedback we collected from our stakeholders. So it's a little bit different. So ESJ is a different definition by the state of California that includes those communities, but it also is a little bit more expansive to include other low-income communities that maybe don't have the same air quality issues as those DACs. Because we got that feedback, particularly from a lot of like coastal communities like Ventura County, Santa Barbara County, they have low income populations, but they don't meet that that DAC definition. So we went with the ESJ definition, which is a little bit more expansive.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, my pleasure. Awesome.
Question.
Well, I will. Oh, quick question. Go ahead.
Yes, it's more of a statement than a question, but on the electric vehicles and what do you do about your roads? Some states, I just came here from Ohio, and they have put additional taxes when you get a license for an electric or a hybrid car. I was quite taken aback by that because it seems like a bad time to do that because we're trying to incentivize people to get the electric vehicles, but that may be the reality in the future that people will have to pay a road tax.
Yep. Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to crack that nut, so. Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Bob Stiens.
Thanks, Josh. And just do a check if I can get a thumbs up if people can hear me. Great, thank you. So thank you, Josh. I'm one of Josh's colleagues in our local public affairs department. But I have for the last, oh my gosh, 4+ years now, pretty much dealt exclusively with wildfire and what we call our public safety power shutoff. Couple of hats on that. One of my main ones is our external outreach, coordinating external outreach, especially with local governments and our emergency partners, the fire departments, the offices of emergency management. So that's one half of it. And then the other half, I'm on what we call our dedicated PSPS team, and I'll talk about PSPS. But it's just making sure we have all the processes in place if there's a PSPS event. And also when we do have a PSPS event, I'm the first one into our emergency operations center, or the virtual emergency operations center, to help manage the actual event. So we can go to the next slide, Josh. And I'll try and go through, I got a lot of slides, but most of them are pretty quick here. So leave some time for discussion. So we all know California's wildfire problem is serious. I mean, we fortunately down in Southern California, we didn't get too hard hit last year. But our friends up in Northern California were, very impacted, and we saw 2 fires today. I mean, it's still early February. Saw a fire in Laguna Beach this morning, and then one actually not too far from my house. I see the smoke over in Whittier. Fortunately, those were both small. And one of the misconceptions is it's windy. Fires are going to start. Fortunately, although we haven't had a lot of rain, the fuels are still fairly moist and don't support large fires. But unless we get some rain pretty soon in the next couple of months, or actually the next month, that might change. And for Southern California, Edison, about a quarter of our service territory is in what's called a high fire risk area. And those are defined by the California Public Utilities Commission. So next slide, please. So our wildfire mitigation plan, we're actually getting ready to submit our 3rd or 4th wildfire mitigation plan next Friday. It's a plan that details all the activities that we're doing to what we call harden our grid, and I'll show some examples about that, as well as mitigate the impacts of PSPS, and I'll talk about both of that as well, about some of our customer programs. So next slide. So there are 3 basic components to our comprehensive wildfire strategy. The first one is bolstering situational awareness. So that's weather stations. So I got to admit, I got a little nervous when Grace was talking about monitoring weather from space. I thought I might be in for some tough questions here. Our operational practices. So that's stuff, routine stuff like switching and how can we, again, mitigate the chance of fire, and hardening our grid. So there's, again, the intention of all this programs is to minimize the chance that our electric system will start a wildfire. So that's why we're putting a lot of effort into that. So next slide. So weather stations, and this has gone over about 3 years now. we've installed, and I think this number is up, we're close to 1,500 weather stations. And these go up, they're fairly small. They go up on our distribution poles. But what they give us the ability to do is to get weather forecast, not for actual weather conditions, at a very precise level. So if we're thinking about that, boy, it's getting windy, we might have to turn off power. We're not relying on the 5 national weather stations that are in the San Gabriel Valley. We have hundreds in the same area, so that on each circuit that's potentially in some of our most highly areas that are likely to start a fire or where a fire can grow, we have several weather stations, and we're monitoring those on a real-time basis. We get readings every 10 minutes. And during an event, we're monitoring those very, very closely. And those are available for anybody in the public can access and read those weather stations. So next slide. So wildfire cameras. So over the past 3 years, we've installed 166 cameras throughout our high fire risk area. And the main purpose of those is it's a tool that we are funding that really helps our local fire departments. And these are in high fire risk areas, and these are up on the big, these aren't on the distribution poles. These are up like on the microwave towers. You see it in radio towers that you see on mountains and hills. And we can see about 95% of our service territory that's in high fire risk areas using these cameras. So what this gives, again, the fire department is the main beneficiary of these. What these give the fire department the ability to do, if a fire starts, like this one down in Laguna Beach this morning, the fire departments can get on that. It's not necessarily intended to be a fire detection system, but it's to help them see where the fire is. Fire departments have the ability to actually get in and control the cameras. So they can move the cameras to see where the fire is. They can triangulate a couple of cameras, get an idea of exactly precise location where the fire is, which direction it's spreading, so that they can then decide how to best deploy fire resources. So next slide. So our advanced weather modeling. So this is the guy in the middle here is this guy named Tom Rolinski, who is one of the foremost fuel experts and fire experts in the country. We were fortunate about 2 years ago to hire him away from the National Weather, I think he was with the National Weather Service. I think he was with the Forest Service. He's just a great resource for us. So we're taking all that real time, that 1,400 weather stations, along with other modeling tools. We have 4 supercomputers that are in real time doing analysis to help us determine what chances are potential for a fire. So they're looking at what are the wind conditions, they're looking at the fuel conditions, they're looking at humidity, and a lot of other stuff that probably Grace would understand, but I wouldn't. But when we have 4 supercomputers that are modeling that, they'll produce what we call fire spread models. So we can see if a fire started here under these conditions, where would it spread and how fast would it spread? All that is monitored 24/7. And during an event, we are very closely using a bunch of very sophisticated information, not just the information we have, but from third-party vendors that help us do weather modeling and weather forecasting. So next slide. Thank you, Josh. So another tool we started deploying about 2.5 years ago is what we call our expedited inspection program. We're always inspecting our equipment. It's on a regular schedule depending on the type of piece of equipment. Some pieces of equipment might be inspected every 6 months, every year, some every 5 years. Again, it depends on the age of the equipment and the type piece of equipment. We decided that wasn't enough. So we are now every year, we started this about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, decided to inspect every piece of equipment that's in a high fire risk area. We started off from the ground, inspecting it from the ground. We learned that wasn't good enough, because if a termite is doing damage to the tops of the poles or the cross arms where our lines are, you can't see that from the ground. So we now have an aerial inspection program that's inspecting all of our equipment in high fire risk areas. It's using a combination of helicopters and drones. And this can get, I mean, it's amazing the photography abilities of this. You know, we can see if a bolt, you know, from flying a helicopter or a drone, we can see if a bolt is missing from one of our power poles. And we log that in, we do the analysis, and depending on how, excuse me, how serious the issue is, we will go in and repair it. So next slide, please, Josh. So vegetation management is a huge part of our inspection program. Most of the time, where there's a utility caused wildfire, it's because something blows into the lines, not because the line fails or falls apart or falls down. I mean, that does happen on occasion, but the biggest problem is vegetation, trees blowing into our lines. Palm fronds are our worst enemy. As we all see, you know, in a windy day, those palm fronds will blow hundreds of feet. So we have a very aggressive vegetation management program. We inspect, you know, 1.5 million trees a year, and trim more than half of those, or prune, cut more than half of those. In a high fire risk area, we try and keep them 14 feet from our lines. We also have other programs, what we call our hazard tree program, where we might have a tree that's outside of our right of way and outside that 14 feet, but we can see that that tree is getting old, it's dead, it's dying. And if it does die, it could fall into our lines. So we'll go out and work with that homeowner, and for free, we will remove that tree. The next slide, Josh. So covered conductor. This is the biggest part of our wildfire mitigation program, or our grid hardening program. You know, currently, most of our lines have just bare metal wire. And that's the way it's always been forever in not just our service territory, but it's just been the electrical standard, is bare metal wire. Well, you know, with the climate change and with us seeing more and more fires, you know, we've made the decision, as have other utilities in PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric, that in the high fire risk areas, and it's the decision on where to do that. It's a combination of it was initially based on a risk score, so a very complicated formula to determine if a fire started here, this is how large and fast it would spread. But we've now gone back, and again, I'm going to talk about the public safety power shutoff in a bit. We went back last year and looked at the areas that were impacted by the public safety power shutoffs, identified 72 what we call frequently impacted circuits, and are putting have put covered conductor on those last year. So we have about 2,500 miles of that installed. And I forgot. So the benefit of covered conductor is, if that palm frond blows into a distribution line that has bare metal wire on it, it'll conduct electricity, potentially start a fire, potentially ignite, fall down onto the ground, and start a fire. This covered conductor, it doesn't completely eliminate it, because it's still got to connect to the poles, but it's about a 65 to 70% reduction in wildfire. And in fact, we've seen the last, I think it was the Thanksgiving windstorm and PSPS event. We actually found trees lying in these lines with covered conductor, and the line didn't even relay or start a fire. So we're very, this is a major part of our wildfire mitigation strategy, along with fuses and switches and that kind of stuff. But the covered conductor is a major part of it. And we're targeting, I think, another 1,000 miles this year. So the next slide, Josh. So protective devices, these are, you know, fast acting fuses. You know, these are like, you know, sort of the circuit breaker in your house, or if you have an old house, those old fuses. If it gets overloaded, or if it detects a fault, it shuts down. It shuts the power down. The older equipment, it took a while for it to shut down. I mean, not long, but this new equipment, it shuts down in milliseconds. And the other advantage it has is the other fuses, the older fuses. Before we replaced them, they were called explosive fuses. So they actually had some type of an explosive in it, and if it detected a fault, when it opened up, it produced sparks. Well, those sparks then fall to the ground and start a fire. So we've gone in and replaced those in our high fire risk area. We've also put a lot, probably over 1,000 or more switches in, and those switches give us the ability to reroute power to minimize the public safety power shutoff. Next, Josh. So as I mentioned, last year we developed what we called our expedited grid hardening program, and we targeted our 72 circuits that have been impacted by public safety power shutoff 4 or more times, and we did what we call our expedited grid hardening. We've seen some results of that. So if you look at the 2020 fire season versus the 2021 fire season, and the January 2021 events, we actually counted in 2020 because it's the fire season and it's also before we did the grid hardening. But we saw a 73% reduction in public safety power shutoffs from 2020 to 2021. Now, not all of that is the grid hardening work. Last year, we were fortunate. We didn't have as many windstorms. We had some bad ones. The Thanksgiving one was one of the worst we've seen in our service territory. But probably about half of that 73% or more is directly due to the grid hardening work we're doing. We have a community up in Acton and Agua Dulce, sort of between Santa Clarita and Palmdale. It was hit very hard the last several years. This year it was minimally impacted. And in fact, the Thanksgiving event where they had 50-mile-an-hour winds up there, they were not de-energized. They did not have the public safety power shut off. And that's a direct result of the grid hardening efforts we're doing. Now we realize we have to do more, and we're going to continue to do so. And I mentioned the wildfire mitigation plan that we're filing on Friday. That's going to have all the details of our 2022 plan. And I'll go through these pretty quick here. And I know Josh will send this out so you get some more information on our programs. We go to the next one. So public safety power shutoff, and why don't we go to the next one, Josh, and I can combine a couple of these. This is when we will shut off the power to prevent a fire. It's based on a number of things. It's red flag warnings. It's what our meteorologists project. We produce every day. We produce and actually several times a day, what we call a fire potential index, which models a lot of factors: the wind speed, humidity, fuel moisture content. And that's one of the things that drives our decision to do PSPS. We have real-time observers out in the field that are reporting what they're seeing. So we don't only rely on the weather stations and that material. We've got our patrolmen and troublemen. The patrolmen are out monitoring what's going on in real time and reporting into us what they're seeing. So it's a combination of factors that are used. And when this process first starts, when we get a couple of days out, 2 or 3 days out before we think we might do this, we're very actively engaged with our local government and tribal government or emergency responders, because they need to be prepared to potentially deal with this. So we're very engaged with them. We're regularly on the phone with them, and even send folks out to their emergency operations center. So next, Josh. So this next slide is sort of the ideal timeline, and I want to stress ideal. And I'll talk about that in a little bit here. So about 4 to 7 days out, we start observing potential conditions. We're not doing anything publicly yet, because this is like, when you watch your Channel 4 news and you're looking and they're talking about what the weather's going to be like 6 or 7 days out. You're not paying attention to that because it's probably wrong. It's going to change. But when we get to 3 days out, we're getting a much better idea of what the weather is going to be. Again, it's like sort of like those hurricane maps, that'll, a week out, it's got a really broad area it may hit, but as it gets closer and closer to the event, it narrows down. So 3 days out, that's when we're getting pretty concerned that something may happen, that's when we would activate our incident management team. I would, and my colleagues would start getting ready. This is also the time that we start reaching out to our emergency partners, to our fire departments, our local and tribal governments, water companies, hospitals, telecommunication companies, to advise them that this is possible and the locations it's likely to happen or could happen. Again, it all depends on the weather. 2 days ahead is when we start alerting our customers. We repeat that process 1 day ahead, and then again, as close as we can to when we think it's going to happen, we'll again call our customers. It's really important if you're an SCE customer to go to www.sce.com/wildfire and make sure you're signed up for alerts. Now, I say this is ideal because we don't always make this because it's the weather. So in some cases, we don't think a particular area is going to get windy. And for an example, the Thanksgiving event, Malibu area, we were predicting, not only us, but the National Weather Service was projecting wind speeds of about 40 miles an hour, which would not have triggered the public safety power shutoff. But then they came in at 70 or 80 miles an hour. So we had to quickly do the public safety power shutoffs and did not have time to do the warnings. Now, that's something we take very seriously. Whenever we have an event like that, we go back and look, how can we learn better? We're actually starting doing some artificial intelligence to help us do a better job of projecting weather and potential fire conditions. So, and then then when we're in the actual outage, we'll continue to contact customers to let them know about it. And then as we start to prepare to re-energize, we can continue this process. So it's a lot of contacts that we make, but it's very important we keep our customers informed. There's also, again, if you go to sce.com/wildfire, there's some good tools on there. One of the things we just launched late last year is a 5-day outlook by county of potential PSPS. So next slide, Josh. So I think I'm talking here about, so again, I'll go through these quickly here. During a public safety power shutoff, we deploy resources out into the field to help customers. We have, I think, about 8 or 10 what we call the customer crew vehicles that will go out. We have 67 community resource centers, and those are like at some big box stores. But there's also a lot of community centers, libraries, senior centers, boys and girls clubs, schools. And what we'll do there is we'll send some SCE personnel out there that can we'll deploy a sort of a go bag that'll have some it'll have a flashlight, have a very nice solar powered phone charger, so you can keep your phone charged. I think it'll even power up a laptop for a while. We'll also, depending on water, snacks, if it's during the winter, maybe firewood blankets. During the summer, ice vouchers. And so that's a program that we implement during public safety power shutoffs. And next, Josh. Our customer care programs. So we place a lot of emphasis on the vulnerable population, access and functional needs population. So those are those customers that need some type of potential, maybe it's a breathing machine, or maybe they even have a one of those sleep apnea machines to help them. If they live in a high fire risk area and income qualified, which are defined by the Public Utilities Commission, we'll supply them with one of those Goal Zero or Yeti batteries that'll keep their equipment powered. Now, it won't keep it powered for 2 or 3 days, but it will keep it powered long enough for them to implement their emergency response, their own emergency program, to either go to a different location or get other resources. So that's a program we started 3 years ago. And again, it's available for those customers that are on what we call our medical baseline program, and are also income qualified. And again, information on all these programs is available at the sce.com wildfire. And Josh, next slide. And sorry, I am not seeing I see a few comments popping up, and I'm not reading those right now. We also have lots of rebate programs available that are not income based. So we have a $75 rebate for small appliance and battery backups. And what those are really good for, I have a couple of them in my house, keeping your internet router powered up. so that you can continue to get internet service. Now, of course, that depends, making sure that your internet provider has backup. But recently, the California Public Utilities Commission required cell companies and internet service providers that are in high fire risk area to have up to 72 hours backup on their equipment. And we work very closely with them to make sure that it's available. We have hotel discounts available for customers that are impacted. And we have what we call resiliency zones for some of the more remote areas that if they lost power, I mean, you know, if we lose power in one area of Simi Valley, and as inconvenient it is, you can probably drive 5 minutes and find another place in the city or a neighboring city that has power that you can get some services, charge your cell phone. But in some of our more remote areas, that's not possible. So we've gone in and installed panels. So if there's a public safety power shut off, we can go in and install generators to help power that up. And next, Josh, I think this might be we're almost done here. So again, reaching our vulnerable communities, we have we participate in a statewide access and functional needs group. We're partnered with 211 this year, last year, where they will help provide programs. We're very engaged with our independent living centers throughout our service territory, you know, to help provide funding for them to do educational programs. And we also work with fire safe councils. So we're very engaged in our communities. And again, this is a sort of an example of engaging to help educate. So next, Josh. So again, investing in our communities, we're working with first responder capacity building. Again, community engagement will be kicking off in, I think, March or April, our community meetings. Unfortunately, they're all virtual now, but where we educate our customers on wildfire, on disaster recovery programs too. And next, Josh. Helping our protected communities. One of the big programs we did 2 years ago and then last year, and we just renewed it for this year, is we're helping support county fire agencies, where we contribute about $18 million for these quick reaction helicopters. And the advantages normal helicopters drop maybe 400 to 500 gallons. Two of the 3 helicopters we provided can drop 3,000 gallons of water or retardant. They also have the ability to fly at night, as they partner with another helicopter that can fly at night and has some very sophisticated technology. Normally helicopters aren't flying at night just because it's not safe, if they can't really see around. And this program was used very effectively last year. In fact, before we got into our real active fire season, we sent those up north because our Northern California was seeing some very big fires. So we sent those up north. Again, it's an expensive program, but we think it's something that's an important tool for our community, and we are in the process of renewing that going into this fire season. And next, Josh. So again, okay, here we are finally at the end. As I mentioned, sort of the mothership for all of our wildfire, all of our PSPS is available at sce.com. Again, a couple of things. If I want to, if you're an Edison customer, you live in a high fire risk area, or even if you don't live in a high fire risk area, sign up for outage notices. And those are not only, because that's that notification program I talked about, you have to be signed up for it. And it's really important, because if you're like me, when I set up my Edison account 20 years ago, I had this thing called a landline. I've gotten rid of that. So everything's on my cell phone now. But, we find that a lot, but people don't go in and update their records to tell us, hey, this is my new phone number. So, all the other utilities, I see Ann here looking, San Diego has a similar program. So yeah, DWP does too. But in addition to getting the PSPS notifications, you'll also get notifications for regular outages. So if a car hits a pole and that type of stuff, you'll get information on that. So I know I've sort of read through this, but happy to answer any questions. And I know, and Josh will PDF this and send it around as well.
So Bob, I know there's some cameras in the chat, some questions in the chat. So going back to the first one, Kathy asked, at what wind speed do you shut off power? I know you talked a little bit about the threshold, but maybe you could touch
So
on
it depends. But so the bare wire is about 31 sustained, 42 gusts, about it may be a mile or two off. On the covered conductor, it goes up by about 10 miles. So it's like the 41 sustained, 56 gusts. So it's the covered conductor is a substantial improvement. And again, when I talked about Acton Agua Dulce, the Thanksgiving event, they were seeing winds in excess of about 50 miles an hour. Had we not done the covered conductor and the grid hardening in that area, they would have been de-energized over Thanksgiving.
Awesome, thank you. And then Kathy's next question, how do we access and read your weather station? Is that the same?
Let me look at that website. Hold on. Josh, maybe you can go to the next question while I'm looking that one up.
Sure. And then Grace asked, are the cameras that we installed infrared?
Yes, they do have infrared capacity. So the website.
So they have both visible and infrared?
Yes. Yes. So the website is MESO West, MESO West .utah.edu. So it's actually at the University of Utah is the mothership for this. It's a little hard to navigate their website. On the left-hand panel, you'll see, I think it's networks. You got to click on that and then do all networks because it defaults to just the National Weather Service stations. And in fact, I can maybe put something together that Josh can send out on that. You have to click on it and you can either hit utilities and just see the utilities ones, or you can see all networks and see those. The cameras are also available. It's alertwildfire.org. And those, you can also view all the cameras, and it's not just Edison cameras. There's cameras throughout the state. PG&E, CAL FIRE, and some local governments have the cameras as well, and San Diego Gas and Electric.
Awesome. The next question, Anne asked, do the wires let you know there is a fire? So I think she's talking when we were talking about covered conductors, you know, is there any type of
No, yeah, we can't tell by the wires that there's a fire. You know, we are looking at some technology, but it's just not there yet. It's, you know, it's really someone seeing smoke and calling 911 is still the way. There's fire. Now, there's lots of, you know, again, I keep looking, Grace talking about her satellite weather technology. Well, there is technology that's starting to come out that can use satellites to help spot fires. You know, it's very difficult because Grace, yeah, there's you know, the technology isn't quite there, but it's getting closer where satellites will help spot the start of fire. I mean, once a fire gets going, the satellites can spot it, but it's that instant detection that's really important. But you know, those cameras that I mentioned, the fire departments are monitoring those, especially during a wildfire, you know, during a type of weather conditions where fires are more likely. So they're monitoring them. They're also being monitored by that Alert Wildfire organization. Again, as we get better and better with the artificial intelligence technologies, you know, it's probably not too far where those cameras will be able to quickly, you know, recognize that there's a fire and, I don't say call 911, but, you know, report it in.
Awesome. And then Grace's next question, I think, was when we were discussing the protective devices. Do the fuses try to restart themselves? So do they automatically reclose?
Yeah, I mean, they don't automatic. Well, yeah, what they'll do is they'll, depending on the piece of equipment, and it also depends on what's going on. I mean, if it's like if it happened, well, not today, if it happened during a normal February day, it would automatically reclose. But those circuits that are in a high fire risk area, if we're in a high fire weather situation, they don't automatically reclose. We actually go out and inspect the lines to make sure that they didn't de-energize, that the fuse or the fuse did not open because there's a tree branch blowing in the line. The last thing we want to happen is have that fuse automatically close again, but there's a tree branch blowing in the line. So it's a combination. Again, it depends on, we have rules. It just depends on what the weather conditions are that prevent the automatic disclosure. Now, again, it's good, but the disadvantage of that is, and I've had it happen at my house, is because I live in a high fire risk area. Problem is, if that line de-energizes for a reason, it's got to be inspected. So it takes longer to get the power back on. But again, we want to make sure a fire does not start.
And then Lauren, you have a question? Is it Lauren or Lorraine? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you for your presentations. I will start out by saying I had a wonderful experience speaking to someone on the SCE staff several weeks ago about the change in my rate plan. But I have to say that in general, if you're trying to upgrade your electric panel or get someone at SCE, a live person, it is extremely hard. And I mention this because a lot of people want to electrify and they're confused. I also know there's a lot of reporting on the staffing and expertise shortages that are basically out there, preventing many renewable energy projects from finally connecting to the grid. How is SCE addressing this human power shortage within your own organization and in the big picture? We have to skill up and staff up to address the climate crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are, yeah, because it's more of a clean energy question. So those are definitely things that we're looking at, and I think your area in particular is really impacted, and a lot of it has to do with the cost of living. So we have a hard time keeping folks in the West Side and the Santa Monica, because unfortunately, because with our union, we have to pay everybody the same wage. So you make the same in Santa Monica as you do out in Kern or out in Blythe. But we are actively looking at ways where we can staff up our local planning staff to help with those, whether it's panel upgrade or installing an electric vehicle charger or upgrading the circuit because customers going all electric. All of these things require going through Edison local planning, and so we have a number of initiatives at the company to increase our operational efficiency across the board, but especially with an eye towards, we know we need to get more efficient at approving these applications, because we've got our Charge Ready program right now. We're looking at installing thousands of electric vehicle chargers over the next couple of years. Hopefully we'll get our BE application approved at the end of next year. So don't have any good answers for you right now, but just know that we are aware of those issues, and we have a team of people that are looking at potential solutions.
That's fascinating, because we talked to our water company, Cal Water, and they said the same thing about staffing on the West Side, which is that it's so enormously expensive. The housing is just, we're not building housing, and it's super expensive. And even though their staff is well compensated, they just can't afford to live on the West Side. So as soon as there's an opening somewhere that's cheaper within their service area, they're gone. And we're constantly training new people because our housing is so non-existent.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're going through. As soon as they get a chance to move out to the Inland Empire, they're gone.
And yeah, that's bad, because we end up with the most inexperienced people too.
Well, we won't let them loose until they complete all their training.
But Terry has her camera off, but I know she's nodding because we were just talking about our housing shortage today. Let's see, were there any other questions about Kara and Farrah?
You had one more question about microgrids. Bob, did you want to talk about, are we doing anything around microgrids for fire safety?
A little bit. It's more experimental. I mean, one of the problems is the use is pretty limited, because again, it still involves overhead wires, and it still involves overhead wires, and something still, because even if you have a microgrid, you still need to be able to deliver power outside of that microgrid. PG&E is doing it, but they do, their approach to public safety power shutoffs is different than ours. They shut off in larger areas. So what they can do is fire up a microgrid to maybe keep part of a city that's not in a wildfire area energized. All of our goals is to minimize the size of a public safety power shutoff. I was just working on one of our post-event reports today. And, you know, although a circuit may be a mile and a half long, it might start in downtown Duarte before it gets up in the hills. So we put a lot of effort on putting switches on so that we only de-energize the part of the line that's experiencing those wind conditions that would start a wildfire. It's a little different approach. We are doing some microgrids, more experimental to help keep like maybe a school powered up. And then we're also looking at a couple experimental ones, I think up in somewhere in Ventura County. Those aren't, the main purpose of those is not necessarily wildfire related.
Yeah, and we did have that extra SCHIP incentive for customers in the high fire risk area, right? Because there's also the cost factor of microgrids as well, too, right? Like it's, in some ways, it's more cost effective to encourage the customers to go solar and add batteries rather than build a community scale microgrid.
Right.
And you have another question?
I do. It occurs to me after listening to all of this that it seems as if the ultimate answer given climate change is to eventually underground as much as possible of the urbanized wire system as possible for safety purposes, if nothing else. Is that something that the power companies are even thinking about? Because I know it's incredibly expensive.
Yeah, and you hit on it. In fact, PG&E today just announced a program, and I do not remember what the number is, but it is
billions,
tens of billions of dollars. I think I please don't hold me to this. I want to say $25 billion, and that's costs that are paid by the ratepayers. So it's probably about, depending on where the lines are, $2 to $3 million a mile to underground a line, but it's higher in the mountain, you know, the high fire risk area, because you're in mountains, you're in hills, you got to cross canyons, go through canyons. The cost for the covered conductor is about $450,000 a mile. So it's not quite 10 to 1, but it's a substantial difference. And again, those are costs paid by the ratepayers, by us, the ratepayers. But we are looking at undergrounding. There may be incidences where, boy, the winds are so high there, even with the covered conductor, or, you know, just from a technical point of view, it makes more sense to underground. So we are looking at that, and we will mention, and that some of that will be discussed or in our wildfire mitigation plan.
So something like Fremont Canyon would be a prime candidate, perhaps, because the winds are regularly very high there. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking?
Yeah, I'm not quite familiar with that area, but again, you know, when I hear the term canyon, I think it's more expensive to underground, because again, you have a canyon. It's also more difficult because and it's also much longer. I mean, you know, we did 1,000 miles of covered conductor in a year. Boy, you know, trying to do that much undergrounding would take a long time. But again, PG&E thinks they have a solution. So we'll see what they've just announced it today. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, Bob, isn't their wildfire risk different, right? They're more trees falling, whereas us is more wind-blown debris.
Yeah. They're just in a world, because you know, they're in a much more forest area type environment than we are. So as Josh said, trees can fall into the trees can fall into the wires and knock down wires. But again, you know, and it's something we're always looking at, and it's something we're looking at even more right now. But you know, again, we would not have been able to reduce the wildfire near as much as we did if we're relying only on underground. But that's not saying we're not going to do it. We are looking at it.
So I have another question about the difference between investor-owned utilities, IOUs like you, and you're regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. And then there are municipal power providers like LA, DWP, and Sacramento. And they they control who they serve by saying, we refuse to annex you and give you services, right? But like, so they control their service area by who they decide to annex and who they don't. But you guys, I thought the CPUC requires that you service people no matter how dangerous the territory is.
Correct.
Correct.
And so then the ratepayers like us in the urban core, we get stuck subsidizing the sprawl, even though it's, you know, it's dangerous, but you're forced to go out there and do it anyways, right? And then it gets passed along to ratepayers like us in the urban core.
Correct. That's a big part of the, when we're looking at wildfire mitigation, we're not just looking at us, we're also, you know, want to look at holistic solutions across the state. And it's probably why you've seen the governor talk about better land use management, right? Like,
yeah,
we want to continue incentivizing the sprawl, knowing it's going to increase the fire risk.
And I know the University of Wisconsin's their geography department did a study that showed the majority of homes built in California between 1990 and now have been built in the WUI. The vast majority, and over half of it was in high fire danger zones. But that's one of the things that I look at, like why our rates just went up $3.5 billion for wildfire and climate change reasons. But that's because we're sending people farther and farther out to live in the tree, right? So that's, I'm sorry, that's not a question. But I do have another question about transmission, which is, have you ever had to do a PSPS for these regional transmission lines that like bring us like solar or wind power from the east? Have you ever had to shut that?
No, and we do have protocols in place, but you know, I mean, the advantage of those are they're much higher. So, right, the chance of a tree branch blowing in, and you know, I could, well, it's not light out anymore. I could say I could look at them in my back, almost in my backyard here. But the chance of a tree branch blowing 100 feet in the air into these lines, and they're also spread apart far, so the chance of that is pretty remote. Although we do have protocols in place for that. We do monitor for it. And you know, it's more probably like the again, I don't want to talk too much utility, the sub transmission. So that takes it from a substation to another substation. But the advantage of that is there's multiple lines feeding that substation. So if we do have to de-energize one of the sub transmission lines, we can usually feed it from another one. Now it all depends on how much demand there is at the time. But we have not had to de-energize any of the major transmission lines.
Okay,
for wind conditions.
Okay, and then I had another question, which is, do we ever have like contention on the, do we ever have like too much traffic on the interstate transmission lines and have difficulty bringing enough power in here during these hot weather events where everyone needs their air conditioner? Yeah,
we do, especially if, I mean, it all depends on the situation, but it's usually if, you know, potentially one of those, if there's a wildfire burning under those lines, sometimes they either de-energize itself or we de-energize it at the request of a fire department, because fire officials may not want to be flying helicopters over a live line. Yeah, so it can happen. Or, you know, if a line is out because of just maintenance or there's a problem with the line, yes. But, you know, generally the system is robust enough, but there are those, you know, August of 2 years ago, there was a fire burning in Southern Oregon or something that shut down the intertie between the three West Coast states. So, I mean, generally there's enough capacity, but again, you know, you get that August heat storm. It's been going on for 7 days, and everyone is saying the heck with it. They're keeping the air conditioner running at night because it isn't cooling down. Yeah, but it's very, very rare.
And we are taking a lot of precautions to increase the resiliency of the grid to prevent the likelihood of that type of a situation, right? So we've installed something like, you know, we increased between 2020 and 2021, we increased the amount of energy storage in Edison service territory by a factor of 15. Yeah. And we're doing that again this year. So we're planning to install a similar amount of energy storage, and that'll help give us that resiliency so we can get through those peaks. 'Cause
Right,
it really
and
only-
yeah, and I see Joan is here and Glendale is adding 50 megawatt hours worth of storage over at their Grayson facility too.
Fantastic. Awesome. Any other questions?
Well, I want to thank you for a very